Right now, as global markets hold their collective breath waiting for a geopolitical ceasefire, a British naval commander just went on live television and made a chilling admission. The Royal Navy, he stated, is simply not ready to handle the escalating maritime threats in the Persian Gulf. Within hours of that broadcast, Washington delivered a quiet but earth-shattering ultimatum that has completely rewired the global financial order. The United States of America is officially signaling the closure of its free security umbrella. Welcome to Prism News. I am your host, and today we are pulling back the curtain on the real conflict being fought right under our noses. It is not just a battle of interceptor missiles and combat drones, but a brutal, silent war of capital flow, insurance premiums, and sovereign debt. According to recent intelligence dispatches and financial data tracked by Reuters, the new implicit policy doctrine out of Washington dictates that nations heavily reliant on the Strait of Hormuz for their energy needs must now step up and physically defend those transit routes. The American taxpayer will no longer single-handedly subsidize the safe passage of global crude oil. This is a monumental pivot. For decades, the entire Western economic model relied on the absolute certainty that the United States Navy would keep the oil flowing, absorbing the multi-billion-dollar costs of maritime security so that European and Asian markets could thrive. By removing that absolute guarantee, Washington just triggered a seismic shockwave through the derivatives and insurance markets in London and New York. When the United States steps back to a supporting role, the immediate casualty is the maritime insurance market. Lloyd's of London and other major underwriters are already recalculating their risk models in real time. We are seeing war risk premiums skyrocket to unprecedented levels. If a commercial vessel wants to transit the Gulf today, the cost to insure that single voyage has multiplied exponentially. This is not a distant geopolitical abstraction. This is a direct, unavoidable tax on the global supply chain. When shipping companies pay higher insurance premiums, those costs are immediately passed down to the consumer at the gas pump, the grocery store, and the utility bill. By forcing allies to share the defense burden, the United States is essentially calling the bluff of the international community. For years, European capitals have criticized American foreign policy while comfortably hiding behind American aircraft carriers. Now, the invoice has arrived. Tell me in the comments below. Do you believe it is time for the rest of the world to pay their fair share for global security? Or is this shifting dynamic a dangerous risk for global trade? Before we dive into how Wall Street is front-running this massive geopolitical shift, we have to look at the tactical reality on the ground. How do you financially neutralize an adversary that refuses to meet you on an open battlefield? The answer lies in a recently leaked 33-page intelligence dossier, one that changes everything we know about the strategic strikes happening right now. Mainstream outlets recently reported that the United States struck a key bridge connecting major logistical hubs, completely severing a vital transportation artery. On the surface, it looks like standard military infrastructure denial, but the leaked documents reveal a much darker economic strategy at play. The adversary has spent years weaponizing civilian infrastructure, transforming commercial garages, hospitals, and public highways into concealed launch pads and logistical hubs. This is what intelligence analysts call civilian shield economics. By embedding military assets within the civilian economy, the adversary forces the United States and its allies to make impossible choices, risking massive international condemnation while fighting an asymmetric war. The strike on the Key Bridge was not just about stopping the movement of troops. It was a surgical operation designed to paralyze the shadow economy of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The Guard Corps operates essentially as a massive corporate conglomerate, controlling vast sectors of the domestic economy, from construction to telecommunications. Their logistical network relies entirely on these heavy infrastructure arteries to move illicit funds, smuggled dual-use technologies, and sanctioned crude oil. By dropping that specific bridge, the United States effectively severed the central nervous system of their domestic supply chain. It forces the adversary to reroute their shadow trade through less secure, more expensive pathways, bleeding their financial reserves dry. Every extra mile their smuggling convoys have to travel adds exponential costs to their operations. We are witnessing a masterclass in financial attrition. The goal is not to engage in a drawn-out ground conflict, but to bankrupt the operational capacity of the adversary. But while this high-stakes financial chess match is playing out, the response from traditional Western allies has been remarkably weak. In the next segment, we will expose exactly how the fragility of European naval power is sparking a massive flight of capital across the Atlantic. Stay with me, because the numbers we are about to reveal show a very different picture than what politicians are claiming on television. The illusion of a unified Western military front is shattering, and the financial markets are pricing in this new reality with ruthless efficiency. When a high-ranking commander of the United Kingdom mine countermeasures fleet openly admits that their conventional deterrence is compromised, it sends a massive red flag to institutional investors worldwide. Europe is rapidly being exposed as a paper tiger in this specific theater of operations. Despite heavy reliance on Middle Eastern energy, major European powers have shown extreme reluctance to commit significant naval assets to the protection of the shipping lanes. They are asking for restraint while hoping the United States will quietly handle the heavy lifting, but the smart money on Wall Street and in the City of London is not waiting for politicians to find their courage. We are currently tracking a massive phenomenon of capital flight. Institutional investors, hedge funds, and sovereign wealth managers are looking at the geopolitical vulnerability of the Eurozone, and they are quietly pulling their capital out. Where is that money going? It is flowing directly into the United States dollar and American industrial defense contractors. When you see defense stocks surging in New York, it is not just domestic speculation, it is global capital seeking the only reliable safe haven left on the board. The euro is facing immense downward pressure because energy-dependent European manufacturing simply cannot survive a prolonged supply chain disruption without the protective umbrella of American naval supremacy. If the shipping lanes close, German factories halt, French logistics freeze, and the European Central Bank is forced back into a corner. Meanwhile, the United States, being a net exporter of energy and possessing the strongest military-industrial complex on the planet, stands to absorb trillions of dollars in fleeing foreign capital. This dynamic creates a terrifying feedback loop for Europe. The less they spend on defense, the weaker their geopolitical leverage becomes, which causes more capital to flee their markets, which in turn leaves them with even less tax revenue to fund their militaries. It is an economic death spiral triggered by decades of underinvestment in hard power. But while Europe hesitates, an unexpected player has quietly entered the battlefield, wielding an economic weapon that is devastating the adversary without firing a single shot. The story of the United Arab Emirates is the untold financial twist of this entire crisis. If you want to understand the true nature of modern geopolitical leverage, you have to look away from the aircraft carriers and focus on the banking sector. While the mainstream media fixates on the possibility of a kinetic war, the United Arab Emirates has quietly opened a devastating economic front. Reports indicate that the Gulf states are on high alert, and the Emirates are preparing to join the effort to secure the Strait of Hormuz. But their most effective weapon is not their military, it is their financial infrastructure. For decades, the adversary has relied on complex networks of front companies and illicit banking channels operating out of regional financial hubs to bypass international sanctions. Dubai has historically been a critical nexus for this gray market trade. However, recent data suggests a massive paradigm shift. The Emirates are systematically dismantling these financial shadow networks by enforcing strict visa bans, freezing suspicious corporate assets, and implementing rigorous compliance protocols on regional banking transfers. They are executing a textbook economic chokehold. This is financial warfare at its absolute finest. The adversary needs hard currency, specifically United States dollars, to fund its proxy networks and purchase missile components on the black market. By cutting off their access to the regional financial laundromats, the Emirates are starving the adversary of liquidity. This is why Thran is experiencing catastrophic currency devaluation. When a government cannot access foreign reserves, inflation spirals completely out of control, destroying the purchasing power of the average citizen. The leadership is forced to print endless amounts of their local currency just to keep the government functioning, which only accelerates the economic collapse. The Emirates understand the game theory perfectly. They know that a direct military confrontation would be devastating for their own economy, which relies heavily on foreign investment, tourism, and safe trade routes. Therefore, they are utilizing their supreme advantage as a global financial hub to squeeze the adversary into submission. It is a brilliant silent strategy that completely alters the balance of power in the Middle East. Let me ask you this. Do you think economic sanctions and banking freezes are more effective than traditional military strikes in the modern era? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The coordination between the United States and Israel right now represents a fundamental shift in operational philosophy. The Israeli Air Force and the Allied Command are reportedly waiting for the final strategic clearance to target key energy infrastructures. But let me be perfectly clear, this is not about mindless destruction. This is a highly calculated campaign to decapitate the financial arteries of the proxy networks. Hezbollah and other regional proxies do not operate on ideology alone. They require a massive, continuous pipeline of funding to maintain their payrolls, purchase weapons, and sustain their political influence. That funding is directly tied to the illicit sale of sanctioned oil and the operational capability of the Central Command in Thran. When the United States strikes logistical hubs and when Israel prepares to neutralize energy terminals, they are acting like forensic accountants with precision-guided munitions. They are erasing the revenue streams. According to historical data from the International Monetary Fund, economies highly dependent on single-sector exports, like crude oil, are incredibly fragile when that single pillar is threatened. If the Allied forces neutralize the key refining capacities or block the maritime export terminals, the adversary loses its only source of hard capital. This creates an immediate internal crisis. The proxy forces operating in neighboring countries will suddenly find their budgets slashed. Mercenaries and militia members do not fight for free. When the paychecks stop arriving, the loyalty shatters. We are already seeing reports of internal friction within these proxy networks as resources become scarce. This strategy of financial starvation is designed to force the adversary to look inward, to deal with domestic unrest and a collapsing economy, rather than projecting power outward across the region. It is a slow, methodical constriction, but the regime is not going down without attempting to conceal its vulnerabilities. To keep the world from seeing the reality of their internal economic collapse, they are deploying a terrifying tactic of absolute information control. What happens when an entire nation goes dark? One of the most alarming developments we are tracking at PrismNews is the systematic weaponization of information access. As the economic chokehold tightens and inflation destroys the livelihoods of ordinary citizens, the threat of mass domestic uprisings becomes the single greatest danger to the ruling regime. To counter this, they are executing what experts call a dark net purge. Global internet monitors like NetBlocks have consistently reported massive, unexplained internet blackouts across the country during periods of extreme tension. This is not a technical glitch. It is a deliberate, state-sponsored protocol designed to plunge the population into absolute darkness. By cutting off access to the global internet, the regime achieves two sinister objectives. First, they prevent citizens from organizing protests, sharing real-time information, and coordinating resistance against the collapsing economic conditions. Second, and more importantly, they create an information vacuum that prevents the outside world from witnessing the brutal reality on the ground. Under the cover of these digital blackouts, human rights organizations report severe crackdowns, arbitrary detentions, and the silencing of political dissidents. The regime uses the external conflict with the United States as a convenient smokescreen to conduct a ruthless domestic purge. They project an image of military strength and defiance to the international media while quietly crushing their own people who are desperate for economic relief and basic human rights. This is the tragic paradox of the current crisis. The very people suffering the most from the inflation and the sanctions are also the ones being held hostage by a government that prioritizes its proxy wars over the prosperity of its citizens. The disruption of communication networks also has a secondary economic impact. It completely paralyzes whatever legitimate digital economy remains within the country, further impoverishing the middle class. The regime is literally burning down its own house to ensure no one can see the cracks in the foundation. But this localized economic destruction is beginning to spill over, threatening to fracture the supply chains of the largest manufacturing hub on Earth. While Western markets adjust to the new geopolitical reality, there is a massive storm brewing in the East. The Strait of Hormuz is the most critical maritime choke point on the planet, handling approximately 20% of the global daily oil consumption. But here is the critical data point that mainstream analysts often miss. The vast majority of that oil is not flowing to the United States or Europe. It is flowing directly into the massive industrial engines of Asia, specifically China. Beijing relies heavily on imported crude from the Persian Gulf to keep its manufacturing sector running. For years, China has enjoyed a brilliant economic loophole. They purchased oil from the Middle East, while the United States Navy absorbed the enormous cost of securing the shipping lanes. It was a massive indirect subsidy to the Chinese economy. But with Washington signaling the end of the free security umbrella, Beijing is suddenly facing a strategic nightmare. If the shipping lanes are disrupted, or if the cost of maritime insurance continues to explode, the Chinese manufacturing sector will suffer an immediate and devastating spike in input costs. They are now faced with a brutal choice. They must either deploy their own naval assets to the region to secure their energy lifelines, which would stretch their military logistics to the absolute limit, or they must absorb the crippling costs of the rising insurance premiums. This dynamic is fundamentally altering the global trade paradigm. We are witnessing the fracturing of the hyper-globalized supply chain. As the cost of moving goods and energy across the oceans becomes unpredictable and expensive, multinational corporations are accelerating the process of reshoring and nearshoring. They are pulling their manufacturing out of vulnerable Asian markets and relocating them closer to home, into North America and allied territories. This means that the geopolitical conflict in the Middle East is directly responsible for the restructuring of global manufacturing. It is a massive transfer of industrial power. And as these supply chains fracture, the economic fallout is heading straight for the desk of the Federal Reserve. Everything we have discussed today, from the insurance premiums to the severed logistical bridges, converges into one terrifying economic indicator: inflation. The Federal Reserve in the United States is currently facing a nightmare scenario that their traditional monetary tools simply cannot fix. For the past 2 years, the central bank has been battling demand-side inflation by manipulating interest rates. But the crisis unfolding in the Middle East is creating a massive supply-side shock. You can raise interest rates all you want, but a higher interest rate does not print more barrels of oil, it does not build more cargo ships, and it certainly does not lower the cost of war risk insurance in the Persian Gulf. We are standing on the precipice of a new commodity supercycle. As geopolitical instability restricts the supply of energy, and as the fracturing of global trade routes increases the cost of logistics, the baseline price of everything from raw materials to agricultural products is set to rise dramatically. Institutional hedge funds recognize this reality, which is why we are seeing massive inflows of capital into commodities, energy futures, and hard assets. The Federal Reserve is trapped. If they keep interest rates elevated to fight this new wave of inflation, they risk crashing the domestic economy and accelerating a recession. If they lower rates to stimulate growth, they risk letting inflation spiral completely out of control, destroying the purchasing power of the American consumer. This is the hidden tax of geopolitical conflict. The trillions of dollars being shuffled around in the global defense and insurance markets are ultimately paid for by the devaluation of your currency. The mainstream financial media will tell you that the markets are resilient and that inflation is transitory. But the data from the shipping lanes and the derivative markets tells a completely different story. The global financial system is currently rewiring itself for a prolonged period of resource scarcity and capital defense. So the ultimate question becomes, how do you protect yourself in this new era of economic warfare? We have covered a massive amount of ground today, from the tactical realities of asymmetric warfare to the macroeconomic shifts in global capital. At Prism News, our goal is not just to report the news, but to provide you with the analytical framework to understand the true mechanics of the world. The events unfolding in the Middle East are not isolated incidents. They are catalysts for a massive global wealth transfer. The era of cheap energy, secure global trade, and low inflation is officially over. We are entering an age where geopolitical leverage dictates financial outcomes. So what is the defensive protocol? First, you must recognize that fiat currency is incredibly vulnerable during periods of supply-side inflation. The smart money, the institutional wealth that we track, is not sitting in cash. They are migrating into assets that cannot be printed or easily devalued. This includes vital commodities, energy sector equities, defense infrastructure, and tangible hard assets. Second, you must remain hyper-vigilant about the narrative. When you see politicians claiming that a bridge strike is just about military tactics, you now know to look deeper at the financial arteries being severed. When you hear that inflation is under control, you now know to check the maritime insurance premiums in the Strait of Hormuz. Knowledge is your ultimate hedge against economic uncertainty. Do not let the mainstream media blind you with surface-level distractions while the foundations of the global economy are being rebuilt. If you found value in this deep dive investigation, I need you to do 3 things. Hit the subscribe button to join our growing community of independent thinkers. Like this video to help us defeat the algorithmic suppression that targets this kind of critical analysis. And most importantly, share this broadcast with someone who needs to understand the real financial war happening right now. I am your host at Prism News. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and I will see you in the next briefing.